Hey everybody, it's Critical Rocket here, and normally I do a Lore Warrior at least once a week, and I do something a bit different this time. I've been talking about it for a while now with my brother about doing one of the short stories from the Battletechnology magazine that was, not available anymore sadly, but they were a good publisher way back when. I believe this was originally printed in 1987. This is a short story from issue 0102, as it's listed. Battletechnology magazine, for those people who have never heard of it before, was a short-run publication that was set in universe. So the entire magazine was written from the perspective as if you were a mech warrior, and so it had things like stuff about famous or infamous pilots and other such like politicians and stuff. It had new weapons that you could use for the tabletop role-playing game. Had, as I said, short stories that were written as if they were from the pilot themselves, their perspective. Who'd have other little articles and stuff. And then near the back of the magazines, they'd actually have some rule-related stuff for fans. So, for instance, this one has a battle mech called the Wolfman. You've got some other bits and pieces like the simulator, which has some information there about using some of the new weapons introduced, some maps, all that kind of stuff. Interesting little bits and pieces. It's got some nice artwork in there as well. There's even a haiku, and there's even a song called Dropship Thunder. So, yeah, this story is called the David Trap, I believe it's called. David Ambush, sorry. It's one of the main reasons I've always liked the Panther in Battletech. It's a really nice little story, and if you do have the issue, you should check it out, because there's some really nice artwork in there of the pilots, the mechs, that they were using in the fight. The issue in particular has a marauder sort of clonking a thunderbolt on the head. Somehow it snuck up on it. And to give credit to the writer, it was originally written, I believe, by William H. Keith Jr. I believe he wrote this short story. So if you can get hold of Battletechnology magazine, if you're a tabletop player, they're well worth it. They have some really nice in-universe stuff. This is from an original one, so it's taking a bit of damage now. But yeah, I hope you like this overall, and I'll just get on with the story. Okay, so have a good week, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Despite their numbers, we were in a good position. We'd fallen back into the central part of the city where we could take advantage of the cover offered by the taller structures. The Marek raiders didn't know for sure where we were, and they'd been forced to disperse in an effort to locate us and root us out. My lance consisted of my own Panther, Brad Finnegan's Urban Mech, Paula Mason's Wasp, and Fred Jurgens' Stinger. Fred's machine gun had already taken savage damage in an uneven passing encounter with a Marek Atlas. His mech's left arm was hanging by a thread, and gaping craters showed in his front torso armour. All the rest of us had taken hits, but we were determined to make a stand here, in the heart of the city, where the enemy's numbers and tonnage were at least partly balanced by the shelter of the surrounding buildings. Droman Avenue was one of the main thoroughfares in the city, a broad, straight avenue running east towards a domed hemisphere of the capital, hemmed in by sturdy steel and ferrocrete structures averaging 3 and 4 stories in height. Many of the buildings were already showing damage from the Marek bombardment and airstrikes, and rubble was spilling out across the street, but most were still standing, and we could provide excellent cover. We were certain that the enemy would use Droman Avenue as a direct pathway into the city's heart, and the battle-damaged buildings gave me an idea, which might let us get a strike or two in before the enemy was able to concentrate enough to kick us out of the city. But the Marek forces would be on us soon. I gave my orders. Jurgens piloted his mech into a narrow alley, which entered Droman Avenue from the south. Paula positioned her Wasp in an alley opening opposite Jurgens' hiding place on the northern side of the street. Finnegan and I chose hiding places 60 metres up Droman Avenue to the west, he inside a battle-damaged building on the north side of the street, myself inside the shattered front of an office building opposite him to the south. We entered our hiding places from the opposite sides of the buildings, partly to hide the fact of our entrance from observers on Droman Avenue, partly to provide ourselves with escape routes should we need them. Then came the waiting. We didn't have to wait long. Hidden away as we were behind massive facades of metal and ferrocrete, we couldn't use our mech's sensors. The first hint I had that the enemy was coming was the small avalanche of plaster and stone fragments rattling on my Panther's head and shoulder as something large and close jarred the pavement outside with ponderous, slow-motion footsteps. The rain of debris came harder and faster with each step. It wasn't long before my external mics could pick up the lumbering thud-slam-thud of mech footprints approaching up the street from the west. The structure I was hidden in, already damaged by my unauthorized entrance, trembled, dancing with each footfall and threatening to bury my Panther once and for all in a cave-in of rubble. The approaching monster was big. It wasn't until a towering black mountain swept past the north windows of the building that I realized just what it was we were facing. There was no mistaking that silhouette, that massively armored death's head skull, those jutting weapons. Atlas. The AS-7-D Atlas is one of the deadliest, most feared battle mechs ever fielded. It masses 100 tons. Where my Panther carries a Telos 4-shot SRM launcher and a particle cannon, one of these monsters mounts weapons equivalent to a whole lance of lighter machines, 4 medium lasers, a massive high-speed 120mm autocannon, a 20-rack launcher for LRMs, and a 6-rack for its powerful SRMs. I broke out in a cold sweat. This was the machine which had almost casually straddled Jurgen's Stinger with a fusillade of autocannon LRM fire less than 20 minutes before, and come within ace range of putting Jurgen's down in a single exchange of fire. The results of Jurgen's return fire were visible on the Marek mech's leg and torso armour, scorch marks from the Stinger's medium laser which had marred the paint and done little more. I had heard stories of Atlases in combat, how their arms were so strong they could pick up lesser mechs with one hand and throw them down. How it had been suggested once that a single Atlas could take on a battalion of Stingers, take everything they could dish out and eliminate the smaller mechs one by one with the ease of a man polishing off a plate of hors d'oeuvres. We couldn't stand against such a monster. The problem was, our trap was already laid. Paula and Fred were a few metres up the street and the Atlas was certain to see them when it reached the alley openings where they waited. If they had fled now, perhaps they'd have a chance. But no, I knew those two well. Even if they knew that what horror was lumbering down the street toward their hiding places, they wouldn't flee and leave Finnegan or myself to face the monster by ourselves. No, we couldn't remain in the hiding places and let the Atlas dismember our friends. I knew Finnegan would be waiting for me to make the move. As the shadow of that armoured mountain swept past outside, I took a deep breath, struggled for calm. I need all my wits about me for this one. Grasping my Panther's controls, I forced my mech forward into the north wall of the building. Glass and girders showered outward as I stepped through the collapsing face of the building and onto the street. Like a metal cliff, the back of the Atlas rose in front of me, a bare 30 metres to the east. An explosion of debris from across the street marked the appearance of Finnegan's urban mech. He'd been waiting for my appearance, or had he decided to take on the Atlas by himself? I never did learn the answer to that one, but I knew that Finnegan and Paula were very, very close. If I'd elected to pull out, I have no doubt that Finnegan would have chosen to stay and slug it out with the monster rather than let Paula face it alone. We'd caught the Atlas by surprise. That was certain. I stabbed my SRM firing button, sending my 4 SRMs screaming into my target. One missed, but the other 3 smashed in rapid-fire succession squarely into the monster's back. My PPC spat blue lightning, catching the Atlas as it began a ponderous turn and striking white fire on the rear portion of its left side. Armour fragments showered onto the street in molten globs. Finnegan's little 40mm autocannon was barking close beside me, adding that weapon's firepower to the smoking damage already reaped to the Atlas's back. His urban mech's only other weapon was a Harman light laser. He scored a hit with it on the enemy's massive right forearm as the Atlas completed its turn, but the damage amounted to a scratch which the heavier mech didn't even notice. Before the Atlas had completed its turn, both my Panther and Finnegan's urban mech had ducked back into our half-ruined shelter. We were lucky in one respect. The Atlas mounts a pair of rear-facing medium lasers, but it didn't fire them. Not then. All I could think was that its pilot had planned to take us apart, by its hands. But it would have to catch us first. Laser fire speared into my building, showering the Panther with ruined chunks of building, but doing no serious harm. Through the smoke and cascading plaster dust, I could make out a pair of little shapes appearing in the street behind the towering Atlas. Paula and Jurgens had repeated our maneuver, stepping into the street just behind the Atlas where they could pour concentrated fire at close range into the rear of the massive target. Both of Paula's SRMs hit, flailing armour from the Atlas's right leg. Those shots were wasted, I was sure. The Atlas carried damn near as much armour on one leg as it does on its front torso. Her medium laser stabbed at her target's left torso, though, adding to the damage caused by my PPC burst. Jurgens waded in with laser fire and with both of his arm-mounted machine guns blazing. I could hear the spangs and shrieks of high-velocity bullets sparking off the Atlas's armour. The Atlas fired its rear-mounted lasers, dividing fire between Paula and Jurgens. Paula's Wasp took damage to its left leg, I was certain, but if anything hit Jurgens' Stinger I couldn't see it. Both light mechs ducked back into the mouths of their allies. The Atlas, pausing, as if considering, then made a ponderous slow-motion turn and started back toward our comrades. I smashed through into the street again, white light flaring across my Panther's centre torso. The Atlas must have been expecting a move like this, because both of the rear lasers caught me full in my mech's chest. But my PPC had discharged a second bolt into the Atlas's back before my vision cleared and 4 more SRMs streaked across the narrow gap. A hit! And another! The damage added to the Atlas's back by the Stinger and Wasp had been grievous indeed. I could see bundles of wiring and charred support struts through the smoking craters in the Atlas's back. As I watched Finnegan's Urbamech blasting away at our target with his autocannon, multiple explosions flashing across the enemy mech's left side and leg, chopping at an already shattered armour. We ducked back into our holes as the Atlas turned once more. I ran a quick check of my mech systems. That twin hit had savaged the armour in my centre and right torso. A few more like that, and this uneven David and Goliath contest would end brutally. The Atlas pilot must have known that he damaged me. His machine closed on my building. Autocannon fire smashing around me, shredding steel, vapouring ferrocrete slabs, banging and wanging at my Panther's armour in an orgy of destruction. A wall collapsed, smashing me to the side and back. Worse, my cover was partly stripped away now, spilling into the street in a cloud of dust and smoke. The Atlas loomed huge behind that wispy veil. The Stinger and the Wasp stepped from cover again. More missiles struck the Atlas in the back and sides, and the Stinger's paired machine guns clattered away in unison, chewing into the huge machine's internal structure, revealed through the rents in its armour. The Atlas took a step back, ignoring the twin nuisances to its rear save for other twin bursts from its rear-mounted lasers. The autocannon mounted in its side swung its gaping maw towards me. I sent my Panther scrambling back into the ruin of the building, welcoming the avalanche of wreckage which had come thundering in as more of the structure collapsed. The Atlas's autocannon fire sought me out, probing through darkness and ruin as SRM and laser fire stabbed and probed. I emerged on the street south parallel to Droman Avenue, my mech dented and battered but carrying no serious additional damage. The sharp barks and cracks of explosions from the far side of the building told me that the street battle, where I was continuing. I turned, braced myself, then fired my Panther's jump jets. Bursts of fusion-heated flame sent me soaring over my former shelter in a soaring bound. I came down squarely behind the Atlas, just as it bore down on Jurgens' crippled Stinger. His Stinger's left arm was lying on the street, shredded wiring and actuator circuitry hanging out with the severed end like fire-blackened spaghetti. Paula's Wasp stood close alongside, her laser washing harmless shafts of light across the 100-ton monster's impenetrable chest armour. The other mech was at the Atlas's rear, its autocannon smashing through internal structure in a fine spray of exploding shells and half-molten fragments. I took the shock of landing by flexing low on my mech's knees and opened fire with my PPC as I recovered from the drop. Lightning flashed and sparked in the damaged Atlas's exposed wiring and circuitry. A bolt of electricity played between the hole in the Atlas's back and the street, jumping and flickering as megawatts of charge overload sparked through the air to ground in thunder and ozone across the pavement. Another spread of SRMs rocketed into the Atlas's leg and right torso. That hurt the bastard. The Atlas staggered as though gravely wounded, then lurched heavily into the facade of a building on the south side of the street, its autocannon continuing to fire as it fell, the trail of a 120mm shell explosion smashing across the Stinger's torso, then arrowing off into the street in a crashing drumroll of raw sound. For a long moment, it looked like the Atlas would go all the way down, but its pilot recovered, and the heavy machine turned to face me once more. "Lance, jump!" I cried into the command circuit, and all 4 mechs triggered their jump jets, bounding back out of the street, away from the damaged Atlas's wrath. Jurgens landed on the south side of the row buildings. It was heavy and clumsy, though. "Jurgens," I ordered, "withdraw!" "I'm okay, Lieutenant," he replied. "I can handle it." I didn't have time to answer him. At that moment, the wall of buildings behind us dissolved in crashing, tumbling debris. An Atlas is too heavy to mount jump jets. This Atlas has solved the problem of the barrier of buildings, not by going over them, but by coming through them. Laser fire flashed from the heavier mech and missiles scribed hot, white contrails from the Atlas's left torso. The Marek pilot was splitting his fire again. 3 missiles struck me in my Panther's legs. The others exploded harmlessly somewhere behind me. A laser smashed into my machine's center torso, adding to the damage already there. My HUD was flashing red, shrieking warnings of damage to my internals, of the loss of 2 heatsinks, of imminent power shutdown. That was all I needed now, for my Panther to shut itself off and leave me helpless in the face of that monster's raw, crushing strength. I held my fire to keep from adding to my mech's heat problems and fought a short nightmare battle overriding the Panther's cut-off circuits. Jurgens took more damage that staggered his mech even as he fired hopelessly and uselessly into the Atlas's front torso. 2 battle mech forms landed close behind the Atlas on hissing jump jets. The stubby little urban mech opened fire with its autocannon, but the range was so close that the rounds went flashing past the Atlas's shoulder and off down the street behind us. Its lasers scored damage though, and I saw chunks of machinery spilling onto the pavement. Paula's Wasp let fly with her SRMs and laser from near point-blank range. The Atlas seemed to sag, then staggered to the left. Smoke was billowing from the ravaged, armorless section of its back and left torso. I fired my jump jets and soared to one side, risking another heat shutdown in order to get clear of the Atlas's front arc of fire. As I set down 80 meters away, I saw that the Atlas pilot had regained control of his machine and lashed out at the closest of his tormentors. Finnegan's urban mech. The stubby little 30-ton mech had one terrible disadvantage. It was slow, slower even than the Atlas, which was bearing down on it. Perhaps he tried to fire his jump jets to escape and failed. All I know is that the Atlas loomed above his little machine, towering, unstoppable, its massive fists descending like falling mountains. For the first time in this wild fight, I was far enough away that I had a clear track and lock with my PPC. Coldly and deliberately, I drew a bead with my right forearm weapon on the Atlas's already damaged back. Battle damage must have opened up some of the seams in my sealed cockpit, for the discharge of the weapon brought the sharp tang of ozone to my nostrils. A volcano gout of flame and smoke boiled from the stricken giant. Its torso seemed to bend back around the wound. It took a step forward, paused, then toppled forward like the fall of some monstrous tree. A rising pall of smoke and dust blocked my view. The battle, that part of it at least, was over. 4 light mechs had taken on an Atlas, and won. Our sensors warned us of approaching Marek battle mechs, more heavy, summoned no doubt by the doomed Atlas in the last moments before we'd managed to cut it down. Our cost was high. All of our mechs carried heavy battle damage. My Panther's torso armour had been breached in 4 places, and I noticed that Paula's Wasp was dragging its right leg. Fred Jurgens escaped with his life, though his Stinger was badly hurt, its gyros damaged, its left arm gone. And we'd lost Finnegan. The Atlas had smashed the little urban mech's head and its upper torso with a savage, brutal force which had driven Finnegan's machine into the pavement. I don't know if he was still alive when my killing shot struck the Atlas and toppled it forward onto the victim. God, I don't ever want to know. If he was still alive, he must have still been struggling to get free of his cockpit when 100 tons of carb alloy steel and suddenly lifeless machinery had thundered down on his trapped urban mech. And I was his killer. We left him there in the wreckage. There was no time to recover a body, and neither Fred nor I wanted Paula to see what was left. You know how the rest goes. The Vandals were forced back out of the city eventually, but not before we'd accounted for 14 enemy mechs, including, of course, an Atlas piloted by none other than Colonel Marcus Galliani. The Colonel's death had left his command in some disarray, adding to suspicions that he'd been improvising his mysterious plans for Penobscot as he went along. There was a savage, drawn-out campaign, an endless round of hit-and-run raids which burned through the forests along the flanks of the White Mountains throughout the rest of that fall. The Marek forces kept trying to trap and pin us, but they were never able to catch us. For our parts, we were running low on ammunition and could strike only when we were certain of winning. If temporary, our advantage, it didn't last long. Those times weren't frequent. By late November, word came that a Steiner relief force had jumped in system and the Mareks fell over themselves in in indecent haste to board their dropships and depart Penobscot for elsewhere. The invasion collapsed as quickly as it had begun, and we found ourselves the proud possessors of a remarkable and totally unexpected victory. Victory. I only needed to remember the expression on Paula's face that afternoon after we climbed out of our mechs back at camp, deep in the woods. For any taste of victory, it was transformed to ashes in my mouth. Victory. But a victory bought at such cost that I resigned my commission soon after the Marek dropships shrieked their way into Penobscot's atmosphere and beyond. I would continue to fight, but not as a Lance Commander and never again with Varek's Vandals. There was no way I could continue serving with my old unit, not after that encounter with Galliani's Atlas. Because the look on Paula Mason's face which had so seared my soul had been aimed at me. Murderer, she said. The bond which had tied our lance together, which had made it possible for us to maneuver in such a perfect dance of death against that Marek Atlas, had been shattered forever.